Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Dylan Little with the Mid-Continent Public Library. This is the 26th year of the Mid-Continent Public Library's Veteran Salute, an annual tradition honoring and highlighting the stories and service of our local veterans. Going back several years, the library has taken the opportunity to record the stories of local veterans with the help of our Midwest Genealogy Center. If you joined us last year, you may have viewed our interviews with a remarkable group of local Korean War veterans. This year, we're back to work with local filmmaker Kevin Bryce to highlight a new generation of veterans, those who joined the service in the wake of 9/11. As you will soon discover, every veteran story is as dynamic as it is powerful. We are lucky to have a chance to share these Kansas City area veterans in the weeks to come. Before we turn over the focus to this group of extraordinary individuals with their stories of service, we want to preface this special program with a heads up. This presentation contains adult language and graphic descriptions of violence. It may not be suitable for all ages, and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, thank you for being here today. I'm Sarah Peterson Davis, and I am the Special Events Coordinator here at Mid-Continent Public Library. And I'm going to have you state your name and your hometown and what branch of service you served in.
I'm Keara Torkelson. I live in Baldwin City, Kansas, and I was in the U.S. Army.
Okay, and did you grow up in Baldwin City?
I didn't. I grew up all over the place. Kansas City, Missouri, Texas, Lewisburg, and then I graduated from Olathe South in Kansas.
Okay. So you've, like you say, you've kind of lived all over. Were your parents in the military, or
They weren't.
they just moved around a lot?
Yep.
Yeah. So what brought you to join the military?
So I had a rough childhood. There's some childhood trauma that happened, and I feel like that made me a teenager, kind of rowdy. I was getting in fights. I was a really rowdy teenager, and I actually ended up getting the ultimatum, go to Army, go to jail type of situation. So I chose to go to the Army. I knew that if I were to just go to college right out of high school, that I probably would have continued down that path of being rowdy and partying. So I really enjoyed going to the military and getting that discipline and the sense of honor that came with it.
Okay, so just pretty soon after high school, you joined.
Yeah.
Yeah, and where did you go to basic training and all that?
So I graduated in May, joined in August, and then 2 weeks later left for basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And my AIT training was there as well. So I did basic and then had graduation and then stayed for my job training.
Okay, and what was your job?
42 Alpha, Human Resources.
Okay.
People like to call them pencil pushers.
Okay, and so what did you do for that?
Paperwork.
Paperwork?
Yep. So I was in a reserve unit. After training, I came back at this point, my parents had moved from Olathe while I was in basic training to Independence, Missouri. So I came back here to Independence, and I got a job and was planning on going to KU. So my unit was the 1908 Combat Stress Unit out of Topeka, Kansas. So I would go there 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, and just do the paperwork for the unit and do other types of trainings.
And so that really kind of gave you the structure that you needed, and you kind of, sounds like you thrived in the military system.
Yes, I loved it. And I was planning on going active duty. I met my husband. He came down, watched the Royals play the Twins from Minnesota, and I was his waitress, and I met him. And so eventually I moved to Minnesota with him, and then I got deployment orders.
Okay, so you moved your reserve unit, what would you call assignment then to Minnesota?
I actually didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
So I would come back down 1 weekend a month to do my training, and then it gave me an opportunity to come see my friends and family, and it really wasn't a big deal to me. It was a 7-hour drive straight down I-35. It was easy. And right when I decided I was going to switch, I got deployment orders. So then it was too late to switch units.
Okay. So how long had you been when you got those orders, how long had you been in the in the military then, in the reserves?
Almost 3 years.
Okay. Okay. So you worked, you did your reserve duty, and you went to school as well?
Yes.
What did you study in school?
I was just doing the basics right away to get rid of, but I wanted to do psychology, and I was taking some photography classes, things like that, but they were very, very part-time.
Okay. You were just kind of looking at what your options were.
Yeah.
And getting those prerequisites out of the way.
Yes.
Then. Okay. And so you were given deployment orders. Where did that send you?
So the deployment orders were for Iraq, and I got those in July. We were actually visiting my husband's grandma in Iowa when I got the news, and we were just shocked that was going to happen, but I was excited to go with my unit and to be able to help and be a part of something like that. Not excited to leave my family. I get really homesick, so I was not looking forward to that. My husband and I quickly got married, which is what a lot of veterans or soldiers end up doing when they get deployment orders. So we had a quick wedding, and September 2009, in between my trainings. So I was going to trainings in California just to prepare.
Oh, and now, your husband, did he have a background, any military background? He wasn't in the military, or did he come, was that kind of a new experience for him to be in that whole culture and be married to somebody that was their job?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
It really was, and for him, he was shaving his head at the time, so everyone always thought he was a service member versus, still to this day, that's what we get, because that's the norm. But it was completely new to him. He didn't really have very many family members. He had like a great uncle that was in the service, not really surround himself with that culture at all.
And what about your family? Had you had any relatives that had been in the military, or was this all kind of new to your family as well?
My immediate family was not. My parents weren't. I have two cousins that were. They're both Marines. So when I chose Army, they gave me a lot of grief about that. And my great grandpa was as well. But outside of that, not a lot in my family either.
Okay, so this was all kind of new to everybody then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So my mom jumped right in though, feet first. Got all the Army Mom stickers, and they're all still plastered on her car and her driver's license plate. She went all the way.
She was all in for
yes.
you. Yeah, that's good. Now, do you have any siblings, and were they involved in the military or anything like that?
So I'm actually the oldest of 7.
Oh my gosh.
And I have sisters right now that are 23, 19, 2 19-year-olds and a 16-year-old sister, and then a 13-year-old brother. So a lot of them all have toyed with the idea of doing it. I think they're all a little hesitant because of what happened to me, but I still encourage them to do that, especially if that's what they need.
Yeah. You would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I loved being in the military.
Great. So you were deployed beginning and started all your training then, and you said when?
August.
August, yeah. Okay. And so you were back and forth from California and different places to get training in there. You got married, and then when did you end up at Fort Hood?
So we came home for Halloween here in Kansas City, and then we drove to Fort Hood the first part of November, and we got there, I believe it was November 4th. So, and then the very next day, we took buses over to North Fort Hood. To South Fort Hood. North Fort Hood is where they do the training, and the other side where people live, and there's the PX, the grocery store, things like that, is 45 minutes. So it is a very big post.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, yeah.
Yes. So the very next day was November 5th, 2009, when we went to the SRP site, which is the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, to do our paperwork to get ready to deploy.
And at this point, how old are you?
I am 21 years old.
21, okay.
Yes.
So you're doing all your processing, and there's a lot of things that you have to go through and do, right? And among those what were you doing that day? What were some of the...
So this day we were taking pregnancy tests. People were getting anthrax and smallpox shots. I hadn't gotten those yet, but I was sitting and I was told to go down to the other building. I was almost to the front of the line to see this Army doc to get my checkbox and move on to the next station. And I was told I had to go down to the other building. So I went with this other soldier, Dana Ferguson at the time, and we go down to the other building. We do what we need to do. We get some Jimmy Dean lunches that they give us. They're like little Vienna sausages, and they're all this prepackaged food. It's really great, as you can imagine. And her and I bonded over that meal. This is the first time we had really met. She was new to my unit, had been pulled from another unit to deploy with us. And then we went back up to that building, and I sit down, and at this point, all of the rows of chairs are full. There's 4 rows of chairs there, and it was so full that she had to go to behind the partition that was behind me because I was in the last row of chairs. Do somebody keep going into it?
If you you tell me as much as you want to tell me.
Okay. So I'm sitting there, I get back, and there's all these people, and I go up to the specialist that's there, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, I was at the front of the row, can I go? And he's like, no, I'm just a puppet on the strings. And I'm like, okay, well, behind him, back in the corner, like if I were talking to you, as he was, back in the corner, I saw something, and in my gut, it just felt weird. And I was like, that seemed off, but I was a specialist, so I went back and sat down and minded my own business. I was reading a book and giving a hard time to the guys around me that had seahorses on their patches. And I just thought it was funny. They had bubbles and seahorses. So I was giving them a hard time, and we had playful banter going on. And then all of a sudden, a man jumps up in the rows of chairs in front of me and shouts Allah Akbar and starts shooting directly into the crowd that I'm sitting in.
Okay, and that person was, he was a Army psychiatrist, and his name was Major Nidal Hasan, is that correct?
Yes.
And you'd never seen him before?
No. He was supposed to deploy with our unit though. So I was with Combat Stress Unit, so it was all psychiatrists, psychologists, specialists that would go and set up tents and go to these FOBs and bases and talk to people about what they were going through and try to give them tools to help with their PTSD and what they were experiencing overseas.
Okay, so your unit's job then was you were actually going to be a clinic, in a sense, working with soldiers who were in combat or had been in combat, and really working like an HR department in any office or company then in stateside. Okay, so it was like you were going to be there to process their paperwork and get them into the system where they were going to see these doctors and these psychologists and kind of work through the system. Was that basically it?
Yeah. I also went to bus drivers, or they wanted to send me through bus driver school. So when I'm not doing paperwork, they had me doing all the other things, like doing vehicle maintenance and checks like that. So that's what happens when you're in a unit that's not just for paperwork.
Oh, okay.
So lots of different things.
Yeah, you were going to come out of there with lots of different skills.
Yeah.
Bus driving and mechanic. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, because they don't want to waste a minute of your time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
Always got to be doing something.
So there you are, and so he was going to be, you would have been working with Major Hasan then. If none of this would have happened, you all would have deployed together to Iraq.
Yes.
Okay. So what happened next?
So right away he starts firing, and I feel something burning on the top of my head, and I grab the top of my head and I look and I see blood. And my first thought, for some reason, was stand up and say timeout, your rubber bullet hit me, because we had done training with weapons with rubber bullets in California. And I kind of thought this was a training incident, which still, now me saying that, I still shouldn't have said timeout. I probably should have just rolled with it. But I didn't. I did not do that. I ended up looking to my right, and I could see, all I remember in my head is someone's neck with more blood. And so at that point I realized this was real, or I needed to move. So, you know, when that fight or flight hits and you don't really know what your body's gonna do, mine was move and get out of there. So I wanted to call my family or text everyone in my phone and just say, I love you. I was like, I don't care who gets it other than my family, but obviously I couldn't do that either. So I called 911 and I just put my phone down by my side. And I started crawling through this heaval right now. There's chairs everywhere, there's partitions down, there's people injured, and no one knows what's going on. So I start crawling, and I turn around and I look behind me, and I see him shooting people on the ground, and I'm just waiting for him to continue to raise his weapon until he shoots me again. At this point, I see red and green lasers on the partitions, and I look forward now in front of me, and I'm on the ground on my belly, and a man charges the shooter with a chair. And I believe this man to be Captain Gaffney, who gave his life in that moment, but that gave me the opportunity to get up and run to my right around the partitions. So they're like cubicle walls. So they're those, I don't even know how to describe them, but the metal on the edges and like material on the inside.
Right, some kind of, insulation covered with fabric.
Yes.
And sort of stuff.
Yeah, and they're just a bunch of different cubicles. I'd probably say there's maybe 8 of them all together, but they can't see each other. They got their own little squares. And I get on the back side of this, on the side of the building, or the side of this room, and everyone's like, sit down, sit down. I mean, head wounds bleed a lot, so my face is covered in blood. So I'm assuming I look more scary to them than I realize. And they sit me down, and I get up again. I'm like, no, I'm not sitting down. This man's still shooting in this room. I say I'm vertically challenged and can't see over these partitions because I'm short. So I'm just moving about and don't know what to do. I see another one of my sergeants, and he's very tall, Sergeant Winston. So I grab the back of his blouse and just go back and forth. And he's pacing, and he can see over, and he's watching the shooter. And when the shooter goes to reload, he runs out the front door where the shooter originally started shooting from. At this point, I think he's in the back of the building. And then I run out shortly after him out that same door. So once outside, I actually start walking because, again, I'm in shock. And I'm like, oh, I'm out. And he's like, Bono, what are you doing? Run. Because I hadn't changed my last name yet. I didn't want to do all that paperwork. So I get it back in gear, and I run behind a car. I see a captain there, and I'm like, ma'am, let's go. We got to keep running. So I grab her, and we run behind a Connex. And then I see a row of trees, and I'm like, let's run that way. And then we decide not to, which was good because there's 3 trees and then like a softball field. So we end up running to the SRP Dome, which is a dome-shaped building there at Fort Hood. And at this point, the civilians are like holding the door shut and don't want to let anyone in because there's a man in uniform shooting people.
Right, and there's an active shooter, and they're following their protocol that they've been given.
And no one knows how many shooters there are, what's going on. So somehow my sergeant, that same one, I think was already in there though. Maybe he wasn't. This was also now almost 12 years ago.
12 years ago, and you have you've been injured and just all the adrenaline and all the things going on, sure.
So I get into this building, and then I think they start holding the door shut, and then I think my sergeant pushes them out of the way and lets the other soldiers in. But once I get into this other building, I can feel something in my back. So I take my jacket off, and another soldier pulls a bullet out of my back that had gone in just very small, not very far. And she pulled it out, and then I just sat there and waited. I mean, we're in shock. I have no idea what's going on. I try to call my husband, and my sergeant's like, no, you can't make phone calls. And he's like, all you can say is I'm okay. So I got on the phone with him and I'm like, I'm okay. And he's like, okay, bye. Like, he has no idea what's going on. And my husband said he went back to cleaning the garage and didn't even realize what had happened until like an hour later. So at this point, we're in this building. They take me out front and sit me on the sidewalk. And then all of a sudden we get rushed back in and into like a broom closet with a ton of people. So it was very scary because we don't know what's going on. They keep bringing us back and forth, and the shooter's here, the shooter's there. And it's just mad chaos. So then I finally get back outside. I'm sitting waiting for an ambulance, and I'm sitting up. I'm able to speak. I'm in shock. At one point someone says that I was laughing, and they're like, why is she laughing? And I don't know why I'm laughing. It's insane what's going on right now. So eventually I get into an ambulance. I'm sitting up in the back with the back side of the ambulance on my back, and there's another soldier in there in a stretcher. So all the EMS are focusing on her. They're all working. The ambulance starts driving, and then all of a sudden it stops, and the same soldier from my unit that pulled the bullet out of my back turns around and says, which way is the hospital? We had all just got there. She had just jumped in the driver's seat and was going to drive this ambulance out of
and help as much as she could,
yes.
But
yeah.
did not know where she was going because
Yeah.
she'd just gotten there.
So I think they stopped. One of the EMS guys got out and got in and took us to the hospital, and there it's just insane. We don't know who's been shot. There's people going by me, and since I'm stable, they put me in the hallway and just leave me there for a while. And they said they were going to cut my uniform off, and I'm like, I can take my uniform off, it's fine. And then I ended up getting treated on the gynecology ward because it was such a mass casualty and mass chaos. Just there was so much going on that's where I ended up getting treated. I got x-rays. At one point a nurse was like, you'll be okay, and patted the top of my head. And I was like, ow. They didn't x-ray my head. And I don't know. I remember being in the x-ray machine, and the privates that were in there, they were like, yeah, there were 6 shooters. And they went to Burger King too, and the movie theater. And it turns out all those things weren't true. But that's just how fast rumors and one person saying something, and then how fast it evolves into something it's not.
Yeah, from the time you were there to the hospital, all this, there was a whole stories that were going around.
Yeah. And I still didn't even know at this point too, so I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, like that's so crazy.
Right, yeah, because you had been there, but you didn't know all the other things that might have gone on while you were before or after all of that. Yeah. Now, in the end, there were 13 killed, 12 service members, 1 Department of Defense, and then there were a lot of, like you, a lot of casualties of various severity. Is that correct?
There were 32 wounded. And then we say 14 were killed because one woman was pregnant.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize.
So 32 were wounded, and then Nidal Hasan was wounded as well. There were 2 MPs that eventually got on scene. Officer Munley started engaging with them, and both of their weapons, they were both injured and on the ground, and both of their weapons actually jammed at the same time. And then another officer came in and was able to subdue him.
Okay. So in a sense, it was determined that Hasan Nidal had been radicalized.
Yes.
And he was that this was kind of like a suicide mission or a terrorist attack. So in a sense, the war came to you. There in Fort Hood, where you thought you were being processed to go to Iraq, things came to you.
Yes. There were people too that had just gotten back from Iraq and were there out processing. And I mean, how crazy is that to go through being overseas and then coming back and then having that experience there? Like, It just doesn't make sense. And Nidal Hasan was actually being tracked. He was talking to Anwar al-Awlaki, which was our #1 terrorist at the time that the FBI was tracking. There's a whole document you can read about him called the ticking time bomb. So it seemed like he was saying things that were radicalized, and people wanted to be politically correct, so they just kept pushing him on to the next person. Like, no one wanted to say anything to him about, especially when it gets iffy about someone's religious beliefs and things like that. People always want to tread lightly. So when he was saying things like this, I don't know if they were getting brushed under the rug or pushed off to the next person. So, yeah. And if it didn't happen here, and if he would have deployed and not got the courage to do it here, he would have done it, I'm sure, overseas as soon as we got there.
Like you say, ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're wounded, and you're still stateside. And what happens from there? I mean, this is traumatic, but what happens next?
So at this point, I mean, we have a mission to still finish. So that night, I spent the night at South Fort Hood because it's such a long drive back. So I was actually released. They put me in this little room with some other wounded soldiers, and we're like, we'll get you somewhere when we get you somewhere. Because we didn't have cars or anything, you know, we're just there. And so someone's like, I got sleeping pills and pain pills. And I was like, what? I didn't get anything. So I went back and I'm like, hey, I just got shot. Can I have some sleeping pills?
Because did they sew you up?
No.
Oh.
So they cleaned the wound on my back and they packed it. And then the wound on my head, one nurse put me in the bathroom with a long counter. She laid me up there and washed my hair with Johnson & Johnson baby wash. But then we didn't have a hairbrush or anything, or conditioner. So really my hair just became a matted, bloody mess. And they didn't do anything to my head. I don't even know if they they didn't sew it, that's for sure. But I believe maybe they cleaned it. I don't know. It was strange what happened. So the next day I go back to North Fort Hood and continue my training. I'm on light duty, so every few days I would go to the little BNOC they had, like a little aid station, and they would unpack and repack my wound on my back. And at this point I'm having daily headaches. I'm on all these pain medications, so really I don't know what's going on. I'm not processing things. It's a dog and pony show because all these bigwigs are coming in, you know, it's being paraded here and there. And then, you know, we honor these people that were our brothers and sisters that were killed. So there's just a lot going on, a lot standing on the tarmac for hours to do all these things. And it was really just a hard time to process.
And were you getting any kind of counseling? Anybody talk to you about this?
They said there were chaplains available, but we're also a combat stress unit, so you would think there would be a more urgency for that. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I mean, maybe there was more available to me. I'm not for sure. I was just trying to keep my head down and keep going. So this next day, my husband, at the hospital, I call my mom and she calls Joe and she's like, hey, do you see the news? And he turns it on and he's like, oh, wow, well, Keara said she's okay. And then I call on someone else's phone and my brother answers and I remember telling him I got shot and he's like, Mom, Keara got shot and she's freaking out. My grandpa owns a frame shop here in Kansas City and knows some news anchors, I guess, or news cameramen, I think. Mm-hmm. And so they were contacted right away and Good Morning America, I believe it was, had my husband, my stepdad, and my mom on a flight to Fort Hood the night of the shooting, I believe. I wasn't really able to talk to him. Cell phone towers were down. And I actually, when I was able to tell my husband I'm okay, after that, my sergeant took my phone and put it in his pocket. And I went to the hospital, so I didn't even have a phone. So my husband had gotten a military ID because we had just been married. So he was able to get the news crew and my family on base and they came to North Fort Hood and showed up, and cameras rolling, and I think my unit didn't really love that. They kind of resented me for that type of stuff happening, which really wasn't my fault, and I didn't care how I got to see my family. I just wanted to see my family. So they come in, we see my family. John Quinones, that's not how you say it.
Right.
From
He's from ABC.
ABC, yes, 2020, right? Mm-hmm. So he was there, and he does a news interview with me on the tarmac. He's doing his makeup. I'm like, can I have some makeup? My hair's all matted. I look like a little boy in uniform. And I do a bunch of interviews because I just want to shed light on the soldiers that stepped up and were performing care on each other. And she pulled this bullet out of my back. We had done this training for Combat Lifesaver course, and then we were implementing it. We were all using that, even though a lot of us weren't medics. And I wanted to shed light on that instead of Nidal Hasan, because a lot of this people are focusing on him. And so that was my purpose of doing these interviews, and then of course being able to see my family. So my family leaves. They come back on Veterans Day because President Obama comes to see the soldiers, have another horse and pony show is what they call it. It's a parade. It's all pomp and circumstance and very official and doing all of these things. So we do that. We get to meet him. My family gets to meet President Obama and the First Lady, Michelle Obama. They were very nice. But then I felt like since we were reservists, we kind of swept under the rug. I don't know. I guess not at this point. At this point, I go back to training for 2 weeks after the shooting, and then I had to go back to SRP site to finish my paperwork and finish the stuff we needed to do. And I get to dental, and they decide all 4 of my wisdom teeth need to come out. Now, I have a theory that this is for them to practice, because my wisdom teeth didn't really need to come out, but they don't want an issue to happen when you're overseas. So they just take them preemptively, just in case. So I get all 4 of my wisdom teeth removed, and one of the sergeants that is there, we're talking, and we talk about the shooting, all the rage right now, and she realizes I'm one of the ones that were shot, and she's like, why are you back at training? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm deploying with my unit, like, I'm going. And she's like, oh, no, you're not. And she pulls me and puts me in the warrior transition unit. And so I'm like, okay, fine, I'll see all the doctors, I'll do all the stuff, check all my boxes so I can go with my unit. We weren't leaving for a few more weeks, so
there was time to do all those things, yeah.
And I kept thinking I was going to get to meet with my unit, I was going to get to go, and then my unit ends up deploying, and I still don't get to go, and they tell me I'm going to be able to catch up, and that ends up not happening either. 6 weeks after the shooting, I get convalescent leave to visit my husband in Minnesota, and I'm having issues with my head, and they just say, keep pushing on it, just keep pushing the pus out. It's very gross. And
because now you have like an active wound.
Yes.
And they're just like, okay.
Yeah. So I go see a civilian doctor because it's Minnesota. I wasn't close to Army base. And really Fort Snelling is the only one, it's not a huge base. So I go to the civilian doctor, and she goes, oh, I see something shiny, and grabs a scalpel and cuts open the top of my head and pulls out a bullet fragment out of the soft tissue of my head. So this was a surprise for us. And again, it was a bullet fragment, so it was small, it wasn't that big. Maybe, I don't know, the same size as a penny.
That's pretty big, though.
Yeah, a little bit thinner than a penny, but yeah, so I go back to Fort Hood, and I'm doing these appointments. I'm still trying to get better and just process and try to figure out why I'm having daily headaches every day, why I'm having these back spasms in my back. And the headaches were more of a challenge than the back spasms. We know why I'm having back spasms, but the headaches were just, I have a mild TBI, and there's just a lot going on. So I stay at Fort Hood over Christmas without my family. There was a lady, Carla Manning, who was so kind to invite me into her house for Christmas. So I got to get out of those this empty, cold room that I was in and go spend Christmas with her. And my family actually arranged to send a bunch of presents to her house. So it was very sweet. I stayed at Fort Hood until February and then was released back on reserve duty and just sent home.
So you were separated from your family and your unit.
Yeah.
So the people that you work with and that you bonded with and everything, they've gone on. But you can't go home, you have to stay there.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you're on reserve duty. So you're back in Minnesota and coming back to Topeka, or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So my unit's deployed, so the rear detachment is here in Topeka. So I keep coming down, but I'm just having all these issues. I'm irritable, I'm hypervigilant, all the symptoms of PTSD. These headaches are just debilitating me. I'm going to the emergency room almost once a week because my head hurts so bad. It's so painful. And they don't know what's going on. And it's just more medication after medication. And this is the point to where a lot of the reservists that were wounded had been returned to reserve duty, and they're all struggling, and we're just not getting the care that maybe we needed at the time. So I think some other people's wives made a fuss about it and really got things going. And I was put back on duty and sent to Fort Riley to the WTU there, which is the Warrior Transition Unit. So basically, your job when you're here is to go to appointments. They give you a list of appointments for the day. You go to all these different appointments, and that is your job.
So they've recognized this, and you're getting the same type of care as if you had been deployed and you were coming back. Is that so? They're kind of on some level they're recognizing that you've had a combat trauma.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
At this place, it's still called workplace violence.
Okay.
Is what they're labeled it. So, yeah, I'm doing these appointments. I'm just trying to get better. So I'm there for a few months, and then I come home again, and it's just medication after medication, which is kind of how our medical system is. It's a medication to treat the symptom versus getting to the root of the issue, which is the trauma and how you process it. So I go back to trying to live my life and going to my unit. I do switch units. At this point, my unit, there was just, I don't know, we weren't having a good connection, and it was a lot to drive down at this point and maintain a job up in Minnesota. So I switched units to a unit up in Minnesota, the 322nd.
And what's your civilian job?
So I'm waitressing at this point. Yep. And I'm going to school at Anoka Ramsey Community College up in Minnesota. Yeah.
So you're with a new unit in Minnesota. So that's closer.
Yes.
That helps.
It does help so much.
Back and forth, yeah.
Yes. So the shooting happened in 2009. So for the next few years, I'm just trying to heal and manage and learning how my life is so different now. Wounded Warrior Project was actually at an event that I was at shortly after the shooting. Maybe it was 2010, and that program gave me a lot of help just to get me out of my house. And because I mean, at this point, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I've just really gone in and just want to stay in the house and not do a lot. And that's not really my MO. I'm a very bubbly, outgoing person. So it was a struggle. I was newly married to my husband. It was just a lot. So 2011 rolls around and I get pregnant with our first son. And I try to cut back on a lot of those medications that you can't be on when you're pregnant. And so I have my son, and I'm still in my reserve unit, and they actually allow me to bring him to drill with me because I'm breastfeeding him and can't pump enough for him. So they let me bring him every drill, and he had a little army onesie on, and it was adorable. But at this point, they're offering me a medical retirement. I have a child now, and all I can think about is if I have to deploy or I have to go through something like that again and leaving him. So being a new mom, I decided to take the medical retirement, or at least start that process.
And you're still experiencing pain and just the trauma and all the things that go along with being in a, really you're in a workplace yet combat situation. You kind of experienced both in a sense.
Yeah.
Yes. So kind of a civilian and a military all at the same time. So yeah, you've still got a lot going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
physically and emotionally and mentally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And really, I think I said that I was waitressing in Minnesota before the shooting. I don't think I went back to it afterwards. I was just, especially at that point, I was too hypervigilant. I couldn't really go back to a workplace, like a office cubicle type setting, because it was so triggering to me at that point. So I actually wasn't working. I was just full-time trying to heal and process and doing, I guess that's a long time to think about what were you doing in this time frame. But yeah, I guess that's what I was doing. I remember hiding in the hallway with my dog because he's barking and I'm thinking someone's outside, calling my husband and my neighbor having to come over, and just scary things like that most people wouldn't be so frightened by things like that, but because of the experienced trauma that I had, you get triggered and you can't rationalize in your brain that it wasn't someone outside your house, and that something's not going to happen to you all the time at restaurants, and having to face a certain way when we're eating, and just being on guard all the time. So I have my my first son, and the medical board process takes 2 years to do. So at this point, they're flying me to, I can't remember what it's called. It's like the Quad Cities, all 4 of these cities back up to each other, in like Illinois or something. And I go to there, and okay, this is what I was doing. Now it's all coming back to me. I was in a community-based warrior transition unit. So they sent me home, and I would have to go to this National Guard office in Monticello, Minnesota every day, just report and be there. And I could do paperwork and do whatever they needed me to do. But my main goal was still going to appointments and doing things like that.
Okay.
So that's what I was doing. I wasn't just sitting at home doing nothing. I knew I was doing something. So I did that for a few months until I was medically retired in 2013.
So it takes a while.
It does.
Well, and there's probably a certain amount of this that you would just rather forget. Is that, is that fair to say?
I would think so. And I speak on my trauma a lot in hopes of it helping other veterans or helping other people, especially when it comes to breaking the stigma that getting help for your PTSD makes you weak. That's something that I feel like is ingrained in us when we're soldiers, is like going to sick call makes you a sick call ranger, and there's just really, which is understandable, we don't want people going for every little bump and scratch, but at some point we have to break that stigma that getting help for PTSD makes you weak, because we have 22 veterans committing suicide a day, and it's because they're not getting the help that they need, because they're either too scared to, that it's going to hurt their career, or they don't want to be made out as weak, or they're sucking it up and driving on and not just, you can get help for it and still have a functional life.
And the precedence was kind of set for that from the very beginning. You've got a piece of shrapnel in your head, and somebody literally pulled a bullet out of your back, and it's like, well, let's go. We've still got to serve. We got to do this ceremony. We need to do this. So the culture is to move on and maybe deal with it later, or not at all.
Yeah,
okay. Push
it down. But when you push those things down, they always manifest and come out in some way or the other.
Okay. So you were finally, but you were awarded a Purple Heart, is that correct?
Yes. So 5 years after the shooting, the verbiage was changed because we were not eligible for Purple Heart, since it was workplace violence, not on enemy territory. So the verbiage had to be changed. And then I believe, I'm not for sure, and I should have checked on this before, but I think it was changed to a terrorist attack. I would hope so, especially given what we know about Nidal Hasan afterwards, and that it was his mission to do it in that manner. So we were awarded Purple Hearts. We went back down to Texas for that. And then Texas actually awarded us their own Purple Heart because they have their own everything. So I have 2 Purple Hearts. I also had to go down to Texas twice to testify against Nidal Hasan for his court hearings, his court martials, his Article 19. My memory is not the best. But at one point he fires his attorneys. So he is his only representative. And it's a whole ordeal. He's refusing to shave his face. He's refusing to eat. He's looking all decrepit in a wheelchair. So that was hard in itself too. Going
I was
back.
Say, is that kind of re-traumatizing when you have to go down and make those court dates and testify?
It was a lot to process, but I think talking about it helps. I think that's a great way to process something is by talking about it, and then also adding in those other pieces from other people's testimony, which hearing from my friend Dana, who I told you about earlier, I met her and we bonded over that delicious lunch, and then she was behind me. She was actually shot in her leg that went up through her uterus into her abdomen, and then shot in the arm as well, and she's laying there on the ground paralyzed with fear, and she sees me run, and that gives her the ability to move out of the way as well. And she was actually born with her organs on the outside of her body, and how they were put back in is different than ours, which is probably one of the sole reasons why she survived.
Okay.
And has a 2-year-old today.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I was going to say, wow, how did she fare?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
She's amazing, and I actually get to go spend a week with her next week. So
oh, nice.
Very
nice.
excited about
So you guys
that.
are still close?
Yes,
and friends. Yeah.
we are.
Yeah. So you are, you take you're in it. You have a medical retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still suffering from PTSD and all those issues? How do you get? Where do you go from there?
So actually, right before my medical retirement, I get switched to another unit at Fort Snelling. I believe it was the 644th, and they're fabulous. The unit is amazing. I feel so welcomed, and I'm like, what? Wait, I love the Army. I don't want to leave yet. I want to do it. I'm not a new mom at this point anymore. He's a little bit older, so I'm like, wait, I want to stay. And they're like, oh no, it's too late. You're out of here. So they promote me to sergeant and medically retire me. At this point, I feel a little bit lost. I feel like I don't belong anywhere. I really love the sense of belonging in the military and just the brotherhood and sisterhood that brings. When you see another person in uniform, you automatically have a connection. Even out of uniform, and you talk to someone that was in the military, you automatically have that connection and that familiar sense. So I'm in Minnesota. All my family's here. My husband's family lives in Minnesota, and all his friends. And we are just, we're just trying to get by. My husband goes to a male caregiver retreat that Wounded Warrior Project put on, which I'm sure there's not a ton of male caregivers, but they were able to fill a cohort, and he went, and when he came home, he said, we can move back to Kansas or Missouri to help. So you can be around your family, and I can have some help with you and your PTSD. Because at this point, it's almost like a third person in our marriage. It's just so much to deal with, being newlyweds, new parents, and PTSD. It's so much. And so 2014, we were actually awarded a house from Operation Homes on the Home Front in Baldwin City, Kansas, 3 days before our second son was born. So when I get pregnant with my second son, the VA still has me on all these medications. There's medications for migraines that could cause headaches. There's medications for headaches that could cause migraines, and everything in between, and nothing's working. I'm taking all these medications, but I'm still having all these issues. So when I get pregnant with my second son, I decide to go a more holistic approach. I meet some new people. The VA sends me to get biofeedback, and she actually introduced me to essential oils and has me put it on my liver, and then tells me that your liver holds anger and resentment, and tells me to put it on for 21 days. And I do this, and she didn't tell me that I should go to sleep right after, because when you release that, it's going to come out. So I was even more of a horrible person to my husband. But through that and using those natural approaches, I'm starting to see results. I'm adding peppermint to my head instead of reaching for an Oxycontin or a narcotic. And it's working, and it's helping, and I'm getting rid of toxins out of my house, all the plug-in air fresheners and candles and Febreze, and I trash it. I get rid of all of that stuff and just go for all holistic, and my headaches are getting better. So I just keep on this path. I have my second son, Colby, and we're living here in Kansas at this point, and I'm just learning more tools, going through Wounded Warrior Project, just finding new tools to help. Speaking about it, talking to veterans. At this point, I'm doing oil classes and telling veterans, like, these oils help me, they can help you too, and then they can try them and play with them. And just, I felt like I had such a sense of purpose helping veterans, and I knew that I still needed to be a part of that community. So I just gravitated to it and just tried to stay in that community as much as possible, volunteering any way I could. 2017, I went through a program here in Parkville, and it was a 5-day PTSD program, free for veterans and first responders. And they teach me about how your amygdala gets enlarged when you experience trauma or long periods of stress. So at this point, I already know that I have trauma and PTSD from my childhood. So when your amygdala gets bigger, it should be the size of almonds, and it can be the size of a plum when you're exposed to trauma. But your prefrontal cortex wraps around it. So when you're triggered by anything subtle to other people, your prefrontal cortex flips offline and you can't rationalize. That's why when veterans are triggered, it's harder for them to calm back down and realize, oh, that was a mistake. When it was explained to me like that, it made more sense. That your brains are physically different when you're exposed to trauma and long periods of stress, especially for these soldiers that are in combat every day overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. So I go through this program. We learn more about yoga, clean eating, this meditation. And at this point, I'm seeing results. I'm seeing the headaches it's a lot longer time in between headaches, and I'm thriving and being able to be out with my children and like taking care of them, because 2 young boys, they're on the go all the time. Yeah. So busy. So I got to be on top of my game. So I go through this program, and a month before this program, my father passes away unexpectedly, very quickly, and that was devastating to me. I even equate it to being harder than going through the shooting, just because it was unexpected and it was my dad. I've never lost anyone that close to me. So I go through this program, and I'm just able to process and learn new coping skills and become friends with new people. And then I come back and mentor. So that gave me a greater sense of purpose as well. Come back every time females are going through this program and just getting to be there and watch their transformation, and then still absorbing all the knowledge that's being given all this time. And I still mentor there to this day. I'm mentoring in October and November this year for 5 days for these females that really deserve the healing as well. And really, I'm just there to hold space for them. It's their healing journey, and they're just given the tools and to do it themselves.
But you can certainly help them understand you've been there. It's a path that you've walked and are still walking. Are you still healing every day?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I notice when I haven't been meditating and I've been on social media way too much and the irritability creeps in and my mental health starts struggling if I don't do the tools. So a more holistic approach doesn't always mean it's easier. Sometimes it's harder because you're not just taking a pill to push down those symptoms, but you have to use those tools every day to keep yourself in a good place and to keep yourself grounded and not so full. Social media is so bad for us to constantly, we think we're relaxing on the couch scrolling social media, but really we're just building up this frenzy and this anxiety inside of us and all this comparing, and it's exhausting. So I definitely have to work every day to implement those tools that I've learned to keep my mental health in check.
Yeah. So I'd be remiss in asking you this, you don't have to answer it. Our current events that we're leaving Afghanistan and 20 years later, how do you handle media reports and the news and knowing, and working with other veterans, and how does that all work into your life?
So I think that's been the hardest part this past week is I was reaching out to the other veterans that are really struggling with this. It's been really heavy on a lot of our hearts, and it's just been so heavy. So it is. I deleted social media off my phone 2 days ago because I was so enthralled with it and just wanting to know all the pieces, wanting to know the people, wanting to say their names out loud, these people that were killed, and then there's both sides. It feels like we're so divided right now, so it's so political, which is horrible, but it's these people's lives that were lost, and it's sad. It's really sad, especially when a lot of us feel like it could have been prevented. So it's been really hard these past few weeks. So
what's your future look like? What are you gonna do in the future?
So I'll always be healing, and hopefully just continue to touch other veterans' lives. And really my biggest mission is to break that stigma that getting help for PTSD makes you weak. And there's so many holistic ways to heal from that I think it's important to keep spreading that mission and helping other veterans.
And so have you seen a change in that? Is that culture changing, or do veterans and servicemen and women, do they need to seek that path on their own, or is the military recognizing that, or is it really a kind of a mission for other veterans to help other veterans kind of seek that path?
I think it really needs to start at the top. Honestly, like basic training, it needs to start. And I know that the VA has a more holistic approach. They have the whole health that they're trying. I see a chiropractor that does acupuncture and chiropractic care on me at the VA. So I know he is on board with a lot more holistic approaches, deprivation tanks and different things like that. So I think we're making headway. I'm not for sure what's going on in the Army because I'm not there. So I would be interested to talk to more soldiers and see what is being implemented there. And then when it comes to the aftercare programs and the 5-day PTSD program up in Parkville, the Battle Within, is veterans are 70% more likely to go through a program like that when it's recommended from another veteran. They're only 30% likely when their spouse or family member nags at them to go. That's how they feel. So yeah, and I think, the Battle Within is always having full cohorts, so I know there's veterans and first responders that are actively going. And then as soon as they go through, my best friend went through 2 weeks ago, and afterwards I was able to greet him at the end, and he was just hugging me for so long with tears in his eyes, thanking me so much for this week and how much it meant to him. So I know once people go through that program, even though when they get there, they're like, what is this woo-woo stuff? that by the end, they've found that brother and sisterhood again, and they've filled their toolbox with a lot more tools that they can use. So I know that the change is happening.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I need to know, or that you want to share?
I forgot to mention, and I know a lot of people when I do these speaking events, they like to hear this because I know people that have listened to me then bring it up if I don't say it, so I guess I would be remiss if I didn't. But when I wasn't getting the help that I needed, Ross Perot actually stood up and came to my rescue. He would call me all the time, and he would call me Kiri, which is not my name, but it was fine. And he actually flew my mom and my little brother, because my little brother was a baby. He's only 13 now, so he was very little when this happened. He flew my mom and my little brother to Minnesota to go to the Mayo Clinic with me to try to get answers about my headaches. And then when the Mayo Clinic didn't give him the answers that he wanted, he flew me to Texas with my husband to his own personal doctors, and we're trying to get answers that way as well. And that's when I got to meet him and see he's got a whole museum in his workplace of all these amazing military memorabilia and artifacts that people have given him. And that man was just so amazing, and so he helped a lot of the other wounded as well. So, and he's not around today, but he was amazing and very critical in my healing as well.
Very good. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he was kind of amazing, pretty amazing human being, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of his run for president was just one thing about him, but he was quite a philanthropist and humanitarian.
Yes,
Yeah.
he had a deep love for the military.
Very good. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for the time that you've given us today. Really appreciate it, and again, thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me and recording my story. I appreciate that.
If you're interested in learning more about this program, please visit mymcpl.org/veteran salute. If you're a veteran or concerned about one, there are caring and qualified VA responders standing by 24/7 with the Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-243-8255 or via text at 838-255.